Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, March the 12th, 2021. It is currently 10:57 a.m. Central Time. And if you're listening to me live, thank you so very much for tuning into the live broadcast. As always, you can communicate with me live while I'm on the air right there using the chat feature on the Spreaker app. Just a little chat icon, hit it, and you can say hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be, whatever time it may be, wherever you may be. And you can say hello and tell me where you're listening from or ask any questions. And if you're not listening to us live, well, however you may be listening, wherever you may be listening, we appreciate it very much. Thank you so very much. And I hope that this proves to be a very challenging episode. I know I have been challenged in my meditation on this subject, really. And I'm thankful it all started when someone sent me a simple email saying, hey, here's this video. Can you review it? It was a video really kind of on the subject of life. And I reviewed the video, and it really kind of, to me, was basically teaching almost a form of hedonism instead of a Christian view of life. And it really got me started thinking on what is a Christian view of life? And that emailer asked a question in regards to a passage in Philippians. And the more I keep looking at it, the more I keep thinking, man, this is a powerful passage. And let me state it this way. I can't say we. I don't know if I have ever preached it in a way that really captures its power. And I don't know if other pastors have really preached it in a way that captures its power. But I'm going to do my best to try to devotionally kind of walk our way through this, not in a in-depth teaching, but trying to offer some devotional thoughts, and hopefully it will be challenging to you. Really, this is what we're seeking to try to establish. What is a Christian view of life? As a Christian, how should you view life? And we could state it another way, or I could ask it in another way. Do you view life from a truly Christian perspective, or is your view of life, has it become corrupted by the way the world sees things? Are you truly seeing life from a Christian perspective? I think we all want to convince ourselves, listen to my last live broadcast, we all convince ourselves, we can all be self-deluded into thinking that we have a Christian view of life, when in reality, a Christian view of life is actually very foreign to our perspective, even though we want to convince ourselves that it is. And I think Philippians 1 there's a section here that is so challenging, that's so convicting, because immediately when I compare the way I view life to what is being outlined here in this section in Philippians 1, I have to say, woe is me. That is not my view of life. I view it very differently. And I think the same is true of you. And so hopefully this will be beneficial. Hopefully you'll find it to be beneficial enough to share with other people. Maybe it will spark a study of your own with Christian friends that you have, or discussions, because I think, look, everyone listening to me and all the people you know who claim to be Christians, I think we can all go look in a mirror right now and ask ourselves, hey, do we really have a Christian view of life? And I think we would all come back and say we don't. I will argue that in many ways, the entire COVID situation demonstrated that much of the church does not truly view life from a Christian perspective. I will make that argument, and I think I could prove that biblically. I really believe I can, and I believe Philippians 1 will help us see that. So are you ready? Now, I've already done one episode on this, on a Christian view of life. You can go back and find that episode where I spent a lot of time in Philippians trying to get us to the key verse. The key verse in this section, everyone always quotes it, is Philippians 1:21. Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. The key verse is, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And that becomes, we throw that on coffee cups and T-shirts, and it becomes kind of a cliche, a bumper sticker. For me, to live is Christ, to die is gain. And we're declaring to everyone that for me, life is found in Christ, and to die is actually gain. But I think sometimes we just so look at that from a surface level that we don't really go, wait a minute, what is this really saying in regards to a Christian view of life? And I think the context is critical. I don't think you can understand Philippians 1:21 without looking at the context, because this is what I think is happening. I think the Apostle Paul has established what this concept looks like in practice. So I think he starts with, here's how I live my life. And he gives the example of how he's trying to live out his life and considering the circumstances that the Apostle Paul was in. He was in prison when he wrote the letter to the church at Philippi. He was in prison. So he demonstrates his philosophy of life, or I will argue this, he demonstrates the biblical view of life. And then he summarizes that view in Philippians 1:21. But to really see it played out in life, we have to go back. And we can go back. See, where do we want to start? If we go back, I think verse 12. I think Philippians 1:12 is really where this section really picks up. And I think this is where he starts demonstrating this, all right? So Philippians 1:12, all right? Go back to Philippians 1:12. I got to go through these quickly. We've already covered this, but I've got to remind you of the context, or 21 and following loses its power, right? So Philippians 1:12. Paul, writing to the church of Philippi, he wants them to understand that the things which happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. He's referring to the things that's happened to him. His imprisonment has actually worked to further the gospel. So I want you to see this. The Apostle Paul, this is his view of life. He's not looking at his circumstances as it relates to his comfort, his safety, his security, or even his longevity of physical life. He's looking at a situation. He's not like, wait, how does this make me feel? Wait, what about what I want to do? What about my happiness? What about my joy? What about my security? What about my safety? What about me not wanting to suffer pain? What about my longevity of life? He's looking at a situation, and none of that is his consideration, because Paul is about to demonstrate to you a Christian view of life. A Christian view of life is not concerned with safety, security, comfort, happiness, or even longevity of physical life. He is concerned about something else. So he wants the church at Philippi to know, hey, even though I'm in prison, even though these things have happened to me, it's worked to the furtherance of the gospel. That's what Paul is concerned with. The furtherance of the gospel. That matters more than his comfort, his safety, his security, or even his longevity of life. That is a Christian view of life. A Christian view of life is a life where self doesn't calculate into the formula. The Christian view of life is a view of life that is, how would we say this? A Christian view of life is a view of life where self doesn't factor in, where self becomes absent, where self disappears. Paul's not like, hey, I'm in prison, guys. I'm being persecuted, guys. Hey, guys, what can you do for me? I'm suffering. No, he's like, hey, guys, all these things that's happened to me, it's for the furtherance of the gospel. And if the gospel is being advanced because of my imprisonment, then that's all that matters, because it's not about the Apostle Paul. It's not about his suffering. It's not about his security. It's not about his safety. Do you have that view of life? Or do you see every circumstance based on how it makes you feel? It's not about you. The Christian view of life is a life where the self is absent. Self doesn't factor in. And we all suffer greatly. We all suffer greatly from a case of narcissism where how would we say this? We're preoccupied with self. I think that's an accurate way of describing it. You know it and I know it. I'm always preoccupied with me. I'm always preoccupied with how every situation impacts me, how it makes me feel. Does it give me do I get to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it? Or do I just look at every situation and how does this advance the gospel? How does this bring God more glory? A Christian view of life is a view where self is absent from it. All right? Paul's not here to go, oh, I'm in prison. Let me make a spectacle of myself so I can get some more fame and more notoriety. No, he's like, hey, this furthered the gospel. It's wonderful. All right. Verse 13, so that my bonds in Christ are manifest in all the palace and in all other places. What he's saying is that he is in chains. He's in imprisonment, but everyone knows why he's imprisoned. He's imprisoned for preaching Christ. He knows. They know. Let the people don't think that Paul is there because he's trying to grandstand or to draw attention to himself. They know why he's there. And because of that, his chains is advancing the gospel. His chains is magnifying Christ. In other words, Paul's chains, Paul's imprisonment is magnifying Christ. It's not magnifying Paul. A Christian view of life is a view of life where you seek to magnify Christ over self. Listen, let me state it this way. A Christian view of life is a view of life where you magnify Christ at your own expense. All right, let's continue. I want to re-preach all of these, but that's okay. All right. Verse 14, and many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the words without fear. Him being imprisoned is also helping other people. His imprisonment is helping other people. And if it's helping other people, see what he's concerned with? A Christian view of life is a view of life where self doesn't factor in. A Christian view of life is a view of life where you magnify God at your expense. If it costs you, but Christ is magnified, so be it. And a Christian view of life is where other people are benefit more than yourself. Paul is not benefiting, he's in prison, but if it benefits other people, then that's okay. See, it's all about God and it's about others. It's not about self. Verse 15, some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill. Now, there's a lot of people out there preaching. Well, Paul's locked up in prison and he can't preach. There are others out there preaching, but they're doing so because of envy and strife. Some are doing it for the right reasons, but some people are out there doing it for the wrong reasons. The one preach Christ of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds. Some people are out there preaching simply to try to hurt Paul. Some people are out there, literally, their motivation is to hurt Paul and to make Paul feel bad. He's in prison. He can't preach. Well, I'm going to preach. I'm going to take over to try to actually hurt Paul. They're not really, they don't care about magnifying God or helping others. They're doing so for a wrong reason. Now, how does Paul view all of this? Listen, verse 17. But the other of love, knowing that I'm set for the defense of the gospel. Other people are doing out there for the right reason. But look at this, verse 18. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice. What is Paul saying? Hey, people out there, many of them preaching for the wrong reason. Many of them preaching simply trying to hurt me. Many of them have wrong motives. But you know what? If the gospel is being preached, I'm going to rejoice. I'm going to continue to rejoice. Why? Because Paul's view of life, it's not about him. It's about Christ being magnified, the gospel being preached even at his own expense. It's about other people being helped even at his own expense. That's a Christian view of life. Self isn't a part of it. Verse 19, for I know that this shall turn to my salvation through your prayers and of the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to my earnest expectations and my hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but that with all boldness as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be life or by death. Paul is demonstrating a Christian view of life, and he's like, you know what? All that matters is that Christ is magnified, either if it's by my life or my death. If it's my life sitting here in a prison cell, if this magnifies God, if this benefits others, if the gospel is advanced, then by all means, I'll stay right here in prison as long as he is magnified. And if it means me dying, so be it, as long as Christ is magnified. This is a Christian view of life. The Christian view of life is self is not there. That you're willing for the advancement of the gospel, even at your own, for Christ being magnified, even at your own expense, for other people benefiting over you. That's a Christian view of life, which we all fail to have because we always elevate self. We always, no matter how, look, we can try to describe that we're doing it for God, but so many times it's about self. How can I benefit from this? How can I grow my podcast? How can I grow my YouTube channel? How can I get more donations to my ministry? How can I make myself out to be a martyr? It's all about you. That's the wrong mentality. Now, this brings us to the verse 21. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Now, you got to put that in context with the previous verse. What are you saying? To live is Christ. To live is to magnify Christ. To die is gain. In other words, if in my death, Christ is magnified, then it's gain. But it also gives the idea that to die, I'll be with Christ. But in other words, whether I'm living or whether I'm dying, what matters is Christ being magnified. For me to live is Christ and to die is gain. I think sometimes we rip that out of context from the previous verse. The previous verse talks about in life or in death. Life and death there is referring to Christ being magnified. The life and death refers to Christ being magnified. In other words, to live is to magnify Christ. To die is to magnify Christ. Whichever one, that's what matters. So to live is Christ, to die is gain. Now, there is the personal gain of being in heaven, but the point is whether to live or to die, if Christ is magnified, that's all that matters. Now look at verse 22. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor, yet what I shall choose, I want not. All right, now I'll read verse 22 from a different translation, because I think this helps a little bit here. Let me turn the page in this Bible. All right, look here. Verse 21, for to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me, yet what shall I choose? I do not know. In other words, he feels like there's a choice here to be made, but what matters here ultimately is Christ being magnified. What matters is that he's demonstrating this Christian view of life. But look what happens clearly in the next verse, verse 23. For I am in a strait betwixt two, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. A lot of people look at this and do all kinds of crazy things with it, but let's put it in context. What is Paul saying? What Paul wants in himself is to go to be with Christ and get out of this world, get out of all the suffering, no more imprisonment, no more beating, no more hunger, no more shipwrecks, no more all the trials and tribulations. He could be with Christ. That's what he wants. But to live is Christ. In other words, ultimately what matters is living in a way to magnify Christ, whether in life or whether in death. The Christian view of life is not about what you want. He's acknowledging that he has a desire to be with God. He has a desire to be with God. But what is needful, what is more important right now is that he's there with them, right? Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. In other words, this whole passage, a lot of people talk about, well, this is about living here is one thing, but dying is better. No, what Paul is saying is that what ultimately determines his view about living or dying is about whether Christ is going to be magnified, whether it's going to benefit other people, and whether it will advance the gospel. And right now, what's mattered is not what Paul wants. It's not about what Paul's acknowledging he has desires, but what is most important to him in this Christian view of life is what's needful. What's needful for Christ to be magnified, what's needful for the advancement of the gospel, and what's needful for other people. Paul realizes what's needful is not for him to get what he wants, which in his mind right there is maybe to go to heaven. What's needful, though, is for him to abide in the flesh because that's needful for them. And then verse 25, and having this confidence, I know that I shall abide and continue with you for your furtherance and joy of faith, that your rejoicing may be more abundant in Jesus Christ for me by my coming to you again. Now stop right here. Another part of the Christian view of life. This is very important. Another point of the Christian view of life is that other people's benefit, other people's joy is more important than your joy or your benefit. That's the Christian view of life, constantly put everything before self. And let me state it again. The Christian view of life is a view of life where self doesn't factor in. The Christian view of life is a view of life where self is absent. I've got to state that again. The Christian view of life is a view of life where self is absent. The Christian view of life is a view of life where the furtherance for the magnifying of God is more important. Or no, let me think this way. A Christian view of life is a view of life where the pursuit of God being magnified, even at your own expense, is perfectly desirable and what you should strive for. That the Christian view of life is that you will magnify God at your own expense. You will magnify God at your own expense. If that means being in prison, if that means suffering, it doesn't matter. You're magnifying God. That's what matters. Magnifying God at your own expense. If people are out there and they're advancing the gospel and to hurt you, as long as the gospel is advanced, that's all that matters. As long as God is magnified, that's all that matters. At your expense. The Christian view of life is where you place others before yourself. You place others before yourself. Even if that means, I would prefer to go to heaven. Well, maybe you would prefer to go to heaven, but what's needful? That you would give up, in a sense, you would be willing to say, don't send me to heaven because I have work to do here, even if that involves suffering and imprisonment and pain. Why? Because of the furtherance of the gospel of Christ, for the advancement of the gospel, for God being magnified, and for the benefit of others. That's a Christian view of life. And it's articulated right here in a powerful way. And I think we rip these verses so far out of context that we miss the flow of thought here. Paul's in prison. But he's like, you know what? Being in prison, hey, the gospel's being advanced. That's good, which demonstrates what? A Christian view of life where Paul is absent in the calculation. His view of life is not about Paul. It's not about safety, security, or longevity of life. It's about the advancement of the gospel. That's the Christian view of life where self is absent. Paul also demonstrates in this discussion in Philippians 1 that, hey, there's people out there doing all of these things. But you know what? If God is magnified, then so be it. If the gospel is advanced, so be it. Even if it's at my own expense. The Christian view of life is God being magnified, the advancement of the gospel, even at your own expense. It doesn't matter because you don't appear. And then a third aspect here is a Christian view of life is a Christian view, a view of life that places others before you, their joy before your joy, their advancement over anything related to you, their good over your good, their comfort over your comfort. We rarely have that view of life. And then I'll just throw this one in there. The Christian view of life is a view of life where you would say, how would we state this? This is very important. The Christian view of life is a view of life where you would, in a sense, and you understand how I'm saying this, you would give up heaven if it benefited other people and it would bring God the greater glory. Even if you could go to heaven right now, you were like, no, I'm not going to go to heaven because right now it's more beneficial for me to be here for the advancement of the gospel, for God being magnified, and for the benefit of other people. You would give up heaven. See, literally the Christian view of life is a view of life where you just don't exist. You're irrelevant. Now, I know from a psychological standpoint, they'd be like, that sounds horrible and that's damaging, but that's the Christian view of life. Oh, I feel like I should say more. But I'm going to stop because I think I want to leave it right there with you. I want you to really just meditate on this section of Scripture. I want you to just tear it apart. All right? Philippians 1, and I'll go all the way back to verse 12. Philippians 1:12 to Philippians 1:26. Philippians 1:12 to Philippians 1:26. I literally want you to sit down with a notebook. I want you to read that over and over and over. And I want you to, I try to do it on purpose. I try to verbalize them in different ways. I was going to say, here's number 1, here's number 2, number 3, number 4. I could have done it in a more outline form, but I wanted to try to state them in different ways because I'm trying to spark this. I want this to occur. I want you to sit down with Philippians 1:12 through 26 and a notebook. And I want you to write down, based off this section, what does a Christian view of life look like? You can borrow the things I said, or you can phrase them differently. but I want you to articulate them clearly, or you can clean mine up. You can clean mine up, but I want you to write them down nice and neat. Here is a Christian view of life. And I want you to ask yourself, during 2020 and 2021, do you believe the church demonstrated that view of life? I believe the church demonstrated nothing but narcissistic tendencies to make it all about us and our rights, and not worried about glorifying God, not even worried about the advancement of the gospel. I mean, think about it. When this is the way we should have seen it. All right, we're in the middle of a pandemic. All right, states are wanting us not to meet in churches, and they're wanting us to do this, and they're wanting us to do this. Okay, now we could start arguing and fighting and complaining, or we could say, you know what? How can this situation be used to advance the gospel? Churches everywhere could have started turning on their microphones and preaching and teaching and preaching and teaching and doing catechesis and just going to town. And churches could have started having, more services with smaller groups of people. We could have done everything to advance the gospel, but we spent more time fighting and arguing and complaining because of how it made us feel. And how many times did you hear this? Christians were like, I'm so tired of I'm not being able to be there with brothers and sisters in the Lord to sing praises. This is horrible for me. This is horrible for me. I don't get to be at church and sing hymns. It's horrible for me. Well, what about the people who are sick and dying? That seemed to never come up in the Christian discussion. How can we magnify God and show love to our neighbor? No. Don't talk about that. It's about us. It's about us. It's about us. It's about us. The one thing missing, listen to me, the one thing missing from the Christian view of life that Christians demonstrated during COVID-19, the one thing missing was self. Well, let me put this way. I'll state it this way. The one thing that should have been missing, that's the way I should state this. The one thing that should have been missing from the way Christians viewed COVID-19 was self. We kept inserting self. Oh, I miss being at church and I can't handle it anymore. And I'm so tired of watching church on Facebook Live. It's so horrible. I just don't know how I can do this. And I've been crying and whoa, you sure have inserted yourself into the middle of a global pandemic. You sure have made this global pandemic about you. You should have inserted yourself. What should have been missing was you. The Christian view of life is a view of life where you are missing. But all I ever heard about is how other people were put out, how they were frustrated, how they weren't happy. Pastors, and I did the same thing. I did a lot of whining and complaining myself about not being able to stand in front of the pulpit in front of people. Now, hopefully, though, it did not stop me from coming here and turning on this microphone and talking every day, but I kept inserting myself into the narrative. We all did. The one thing that should have been missing was self. The Christian view of life is a view of life where Christ is magnified and self is absent. Self is abased. And that if we can advance the gospel, Christ can be magnified and other people can benefit even at our expense, then we welcome that because self is not in the calculation. Self is not in the formula. I think there's a powerful thing. I want you to sit down and I want you to work on that. What is a Christian view of life according to Philippians chapter 1, verse 12 to 26? And then I want you to write it out. And please share it with me. If you type it on your like in a digital form, send me the screenshot or send me the file. Whatever you do, however you can use this, I think we really need to look. We can't fix what was done in 2020. We can't fix what's been done in 2021, but we can all try to fix our view of life to being a more biblical one, going into the rest of 2021 and 2022. All right, I'll stop right there. You can contact me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. I would greatly appreciate hearing from you and letting me know what you think about what we just discussed today. All right, everyone have a great day. God bless.